So in this tutorial, we're going to make a really simple React app that pulls out some YouTube videos and displays them on the page with their thumbnails and their descriptions. So this should be a good introduction if you've never written anything in React before. We'll be using some React hooks to get the state and update the data from the API that's going to be giving us the YouTube information. And we'll do things like templating with JSX, turning all of our various templates into components, and then passing data between them using props. And we'll also cover the styling of the application itself. So the code's on GitHub if you want to get set up and follow along, but let's get started making our React YouTube viewer. So let's have a quick overview of the app that we're going to be building. So it's really simple, there's just one form field to fill out and we put in there a YouTube channel ID, and then we just click this Get Videos button, and what will then appear is all the videos, or the last 10 videos that are associated with that particular YouTube channel. So you can see we've got all of the latest videos from the Junior Developer Central channel, and if we click one of those, we'll be actually taken to that video to actually watch it as well. So it's just a simple link to the YouTube video that's hosted on YouTube. So let's just close that for the moment. So this will work with any channel ID. So for example, if we go over to YouTube and search for another channel like freecodecamp, for example, and let's just go to their homepage. You can see in the URL, we've got their actual channel ID for the freecodecamp channel. So we can copy that, go back over to our app, paste that in and click Get Videos. And now we can see all of the freecodecamp videos. Or again, it'll be the last 10 videos that have been posted on their channel. So our app's pretty simple. We just have a couple of components and a bit of state to manage. And what we'll do is we'll build up the app, put in the styling, and then start breaking it down into individual React components. And then we'll see how data can be passed in and passed out of components and used throughout the application. So that's enough for the demo. Let's head on over and actually start writing some code. So let's open up Visual Studio. So this is the code that we're going to be building up. And if you want to check out the code, just go ahead and clone the Git repository. And if you want to follow along, just check out the setup branch, and that will take you back to the starting point for the application, which is where I'm going to start from now. And we're going to rebuild the application bit by bit. So check out this branch if you want to follow along. So just very briefly, I'm just going to explain a little bit about what we've got in the project so far. We've got a lot of dependencies already set up for us. So we've got the main React and React DOM libraries imported. And then we've got a bunch of dev dependencies, which will help us actually process all of our source code and put it into a format that the browser will be able to use. For example, we've got all the Babel libraries, including the React preset, and we've got a few other bits and pieces that will help us use Sass, so that when we use Webpack to actually build our project, we don't need to worry about manually processing any of our CSS or JavaScript source files. And just to note as well, in the webpack.config file, you don't need to change any of these settings, but we have got a dev server set up so that we can work with our content as it's being built. And we've got that set up on port 3020 at the moment. If you do want to use a different port, if that's already in use on your system, then you can change that here. And then all you need to do in your web browser is go to localhost and whatever port number that you've put in. Okay, so let's make a start building our YouTube viewer application. So the first thing we're going to do is go over to our index.js file. So this is kind of like the entry point for the app, and that's what Webpack is looking for. And the first thing I'm going to do is initialize the React application. So to do that, we need to import the React libraries. So I'm going to say import React from React, and also import the React DOM library from React DOM. So to initialize our React project, what we do is make a call to the React DOM library, and the function we want to call is called render. And as you can see from the IntelliSense, we're asked to pass in a React element and also a HTML element where to actually place this. So this is kind of like the entry point for our React application. So we don't have any components set up at the moment, so let's go ahead and do that first. So I'm just going to create a new file called app.js. You can call the actual name of it anything that you like. And I'm going to, from here, export a variable called app, and that will actually be a function, and it's going to be an arrow function that returns some content. So the other thing we need to do in our app file is actually import React in here, and the component won't be able to render without this. So if we just say import React from React, and then we've got an empty app component that we can use within our render function. So if we head back on over to the index.js file, so the first thing we can do is actually import that app component from the file that we just created. So import app from /app. So that's the file that we've just created here. So in our render function, we can then say the component we want to render is app. So if you remember, the second argument that we need to pass in is an actual HTML element where the app will be rendered. So we've actually got a HTML file set up already, and inside there I've created a div element that has an ID of app, and that's the place where we can actually render our app to our HTML page. So let's just grab a reference to that in our index page here. So we'll say the app element is equal to document.get element by ID, and it was the app element that we created. So now we can just paste that into the render function here. So if we were to head over to the browser now, we wouldn't see anything because our app component doesn't actually render anything. So we can fix that in the app.js file. So all we need to do from our function that we've created is actually return some JSX, which is React's way of rendering content. So we could just put a heading level 1 tag in there to start us off. So we'll say the latest YouTube videos, or whatever you want to name the app. If you haven't already got it running, there's a Webpack dev server included with the project, and you can just go over to your terminal and say npm run serve, and that will run Webpack and compile your code and get it ready to run in the browser. So make sure you do that and you've got it running before you try and load anything into the browser. So if we head back over to the browser, you can see our app's running, and we've got that heading level 1 tag that's been displayed on the page, and that's been rendered from our app component in React. So that's a good start. We've got our React project set up. We just need to think now how we're going to get the information about our YouTube videos, how the user is going to choose a particular channel, and then how we're going to display all of that data to the user. So the way we're going to get the data for our videos is using the YouTube XML data feed. You can see an example of this here if I simply go to the feed for my particular channel. So the URL is youtube.com feeds videos.xml, and then as a query parameter the channel ID, which is why we were pasting the channel ID in earlier. And you can see we get this XML data feed come back that represent the last 10 videos that were published on this particular channel. So the only problem with the YouTube data feed is it is in an XML format, and that's not great for consuming on the front end. We could process that and turn it into JSON so that we can use it within our application easily. And that's certainly something that you can do on the front end. But for this example, I'm just going to use an easier approach, which is to use a service to convert this to JSON. And the service can be found at rss2json.com. And you can see you can put in a URL and it will actually convert it to JSON here. So what I can do over here in our YouTube videos feed, I can take that URL and then paste it into here. And you can see making a call to this particular URL will actually give us the same feed data, but in a JSON format. So I'm going to copy this to my clipboard and then go back to our application. And I'm actually going to set this up as a variable inside of our app component. I'm just going to call it base URL. And what I'm going to do is actually remove the channel ID that I've actually used to look at my channel, which is everything all the way up until this %3D character. So now we've got a reference to that base URL, we can use that to actually send our requests to actually get our data in a JSON format and then use it within our React application. So we're going to be using some React hooks in this example, and I'm going to import the use state and also use effect hooks, which will allow me to store some data in the app or state, and also to run some code when some of that state changes. So if you think about some of the data that we want to store in our application, we're going to want to be able to store some information about the videos that have been retrieved. So using the useState function, I'm going to create some state called videos and its corresponding setter, which is the setVideos function. And those variables come from the useState function. And I'm just going to initialize videos as an empty array to start off with. And then let's set up another bit of state as well for the current channel ID. So this will be the channel ID that the user's entered. And we can use this to actually make requests to the RSS to JSON endpoint to actually get the video data in a JSON format. So we'll also get those variables from the useState function too. I should just call out set current channel ID. And to get us started pulling some data from the actual endpoint, I'm going to use the useEffect function, which will run some code when part of our state changes. And I'm just going to wrap this all in an async block so we can use the await keyword inside of here. And to get the data, I'm going to use the fetch API that's built into most modern browsers. So our data is going to be equal to await the fetch call, and the URL that we're going to be sending it to is the base URL, swiftly followed by the current channel ID. And we actually want to get this data that's returned to us in a JSON format. So I'm going to add on to here the then block, which we'll actually call response.json. Let's just put that onto another line so you can see that. And if we do get some data back, what we want to do is update our state, in particular the video state that we created above. And we do that with a call to the set videos function that's given to us with the call to use state on line 5. And inside the data that's actually returned will be a property called items. And this is all the videos that have been returned in the feed. So this will make sure that the video state is updated with the response that comes back from the RSS to JSON service. So if we just console.log out videos for the moment, if we go back over to the browser and head on over to our app, you'll see we're getting loads of errors in there at the moment. And the main reason for that is we're trying to actually make a call to the RSS to JSON service, but we're actually not passing in the channel ID. You can see it's undefined at the end of the URL that we're trying to call. So that's actually returning back with a 500. So that's a problem. So we can fix this just by putting a default value in for the current channel ID to start off with, just so that we've got some data to work with while we're fleshing out the rest of the application. So when this now runs, this channel ID will already be present. So the other thing that we'd probably want to do here as well is only run this use effect function when the current channel ID changes. So we do that by just putting it down here, the current channel ID state variable name. So this function should only run once on the app setup when we set the initial state. But because the current channel ID variable won't change, this code won't run again until we call set current channel ID, which will change the value that's stored in current channel ID and then rerun this code again. So you'll see a little bit more about how that works a bit later on, but let's save our code and head back on over to the browser. So you can see we don't get those errors anymore. The data that's actually in our array, the videos array, is actually empty at the moment, and that's just because React hasn't had chance to actually re-render that content yet. But if we just log out data.items, for example, you can see that we do get an array with all of those videos, and you can see all of the information is there that was in the original XML feed. So we can start making use of that data in our React component. So let's go ahead into the actual template, the JSX that we're actually returning from the function. And I'm just going to wrap the app content into an overall div because you can only have one div as the outer element within some JSX. And then we're actually going to start looping through these videos. So I'm first of all going to define the template for one of these videos. So I'm going to set up a class of videos item. And we'll come on to the styling a little bit later on, but I'm just putting in the class placeholders for now. And inside of each of these videos that comes back, we're going to set up a section for the image. So we'll say video __ image. And of course, there'll be a link, which we'll open up in a new window. So we'll say target is equal to blank. And the href will be the video link that we want to send the user to. And again, we'll fill that out in just a second. Let's just finish off the template first of all. But inside of the link, we're going to have an image. And the image source, again, will come from the data that's been passed back to us. And again, we'll fill that data out in just a second. So the only thing we want to have at the bottom potentially is a footer as well. So we'll have one other div with a class name of video footer. And inside there, we're just going to have a p tag, which will be the actual title of the video. So how do we go about filling in these blanks here where we've got the title and the image missing? Well, what we do, we've actually got access to this videos variable at the top here, which will actually contain the videos when we've made the call to set videos here. So what we can do at this point here is actually set up a loop. So we can say for each of the videos, we want to actually map them. And for each video that we've got in the array, we're actually going to grab the video item. And then what we can actually do from the function, from the map function, is actually return this JSX. So this is a template that's going to be run for every video that's inside of the videos array. But what we've got now is we've got the actual video item at each point in the array, so we can actually use that to fill in the blanks that we've got here. So for example, the actual href of the video, we can access that in the video variable that we've got, and we actually just open up some curly braces here, and we say we want to access the video.link. And if we look at the actual JSON data that we've got here, you can see that in the data that's returned, we've got this link property, which is a full link to the actual video on YouTube. So the next thing we want to do is actually fill in this source property, and I'm going to actually create a new string in here, and I'm going to actually point this to a specific YouTube URL. So this is i4.ytimage.com. So this is a service that they use for their thumbnails. Then after this VI section is access the video.guid. And if we look in the console again, this GUID is a representation of the video. So we've got this prefix of YT video, and then this is the unique ID of the video on YouTube. And this is what we want to actually use to generate the thumbnail. So here I'm just going to split that string via the colons that separate all the bits of data. And then I'm going to get the third and final part of the split string, which is that unique identifier. And then right on the end of this template literal, I'm going to access mqdefault.jpg. So if you're looking at the screen really strangely and thinking what the heck's going on here at the moment, you might have also noticed in the actual data that's returned, we have a thumbnail URL as well. And there are two reasons why I'm not using this thumbnail URL here. The first, you'll notice it's actually the HQ default, which is the high quality one. And because we're only displaying a small thumbnail, we don't want to grab a massive image and load that onto our page. We actually want to get a smaller thumbnail. And the second thing is this HQ default thumbnail has an awkward bit of black padding on the top and bottom of the image, which I can just show you if we just grab that URL that we've got here. And that's not going to be very helpful for us in our application for styling. You can see here we've got this black padding, so that's the reason why I've constructed this other URL to get the medium quality image, which is as denoted by the MQ default. So you'll just have to trust me on that one, that this is the best way to get the thumbnail for our project. So the last thing we need to fill in is the footer as well. So in our actual code here, we want to put in the video.title, and just remember to put the curly braces around that, so that it's not interpreted as a literal string. So if we save that now and go back to the browser, you can see that we've actually got all of the videos appearing from the channel and also the titles there. And we've also got a link that we can take us to the actual videos itself. So that function of mapping the video data into templates seems to be working okay. And you'll notice that there is actually one error that we've got here, or it's a warning, I guess, in the console. And that's saying that we should have a unique ID for each of these templates when we're generating them. So we can do that by setting a key for the template. So we say put a property here of key, and a good key to use. We could use an index, for example, but because on the video item we've got the GUID, that's probably better because that's always going to be unique for us. So we can just set the key property equal to the GUID on the video. So if we save that again, we should see that error disappears for us, and we've still got our videos appearing. So what we're going to do now is work on the search functionality. And if we go back to our code, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a bit more state to handle the user input. So I'm going to create a new variable called channel ID and its corresponding set channel ID from our use state hook. And I'm just going to initialize channel ID as an empty string. And then further down in our actual JSX template, let's actually create the form controls that we need. So I'm going to create a new div and give it a class of search. And then inside there, we're going to have an input box, which is going to be of type text. And we'll just put some placeholder text in there as well, saying enter your favorite channel ID. And let's just close that off. And then we're going to create a button that basically just says get videos. So back in the browser, you can see those elements are now appearing on the page. Let's actually add some functionality to them so we can actually get some videos for other channel IDs other than the Junior Developer Central channel. So we created this extra bit of state here for channel ID, and I'm going to use that in the input box. So what I'm going to say is when the value in that input box changes, we run a function, and in that function we get an event object. And every time the value changes in that text box, what I'm going to do is say set the channel ID. So this isn't the current channel ID. This is just another bit of state which is managing this text box. And we're going to access the event.target.value. So if we type something into that box now, this function will run and the channel ID variable will receive the value that's typed into the text box. So we can verify that just by outputting the value next to the button here. So we can just say what is our channel ID. And if we go back to the web page, if we just type something in here, you can see that the channel ID variable, which is associated with our component, is updating whatever I type into that box. So to actually make the call to the endpoint and actually get the data for a particular channel ID, we need to wire up our button. So we're going to put an onClick event here. And this again will allow us to put in a function. So what we're going to say is when someone clicks this button, we're going to set the current channel ID. So this is the initial bit of state that we had up here, which is going to have the channel ID that we actually want to make the network request for. So we're going to set that current channel ID equal to the channel ID. So when we click that button, this code will run and our current channel ID will be set to the value that's equal to whatever we've typed into our text box. So if we save that now and go back to the browser, we should, if we go to the freecodecamp channel page and grab their channel ID, if we go back to the actual application and enter that in here and then click Get Videos, you can see that all the videos have now magically updated to the freecodecamp videos. So how did that work? Well, if we go back into our code, you can see this use effect function here. If you remember, we passed in this current channel ID down here after we've defined our use effect function. And that means that this code will rerun every time this current channel ID value changes, which if you look down here in our button on click is exactly what we're doing when we call set current channel ID. So all we need to do now is actually to remove this placeholder value up here that we put into our setup for the state for the current channel ID value that we're creating. But if we save that and go back to the browser, you'll see we get loads of errors because this code runs automatically even before we've actually had a chance to specify a channel ID. So what we can do in our async function here is we'll only run this if we've actually got a value that's assigned to the current channel ID variable. So we could just wrap all of this in here. So now when this use effect function runs, if there's no value that's been already configured for current channel ID, we actually skip over the meat of the code and we'll just wait for more changes to current channel ID. So if we look in the browser now, you can see that we've got no errors and we've got an empty page. But if we paste in again the freecodecamp channel ID and click Get Videos, you can see that's all working now okay. And we're not getting any errors in the console. So now we've got something basically working. We can do a couple more improvements. So for example, I'm going to set up another bit of state. So I'm going to create channel name and set channel name. And we'll use the use state hook again. So what we can do once we've got the data items here, I can actually set the channel name equal to data items 0. So the first video in our array that's returned, and there's a property called author. So if we just have a look in the console at the data that we've got, you can see for each of the items, each of the videos that we get, there is actually a property called author, which will give us the name of the channel. So all we're doing here is setting a new bit of state on our component called channel name, and we're getting that from the first video that's returned in our data. I'm also going to set up a final bit of state as well for errors. So we might get a problem with our search or if there's some problem with retrieving the data. So again, we have a variable called search error and its corresponding setter. So we'll say use state, and we don't want any errors to start off with, so we'll put that as a blank string. And what we'll do here, we're just going to, because we're using an async block, we can use a try and catch. So we'll just say if we're able to actually successfully get our data and get the data items, etc., then there's no problem, so we can carry on. And we'll just make sure that the search error state is set back to an empty string. But if we do get an error come here, what we'll actually say is we'll log that out to the console so we can see what it is. And then we're just going to set the state of the search error to something along the lines of could not retrieve videos. Maybe say something like check your channel ID. So if there are any problems with our fetch request, then we'll set this state error as below. And we can also put in an additional check as well, so that if there's no data items, for example, and so no videos were actually found, or at least that property doesn't exist, then we can trigger that state update by saying throw new error, which will basically pass the control down to here. So that's some basic error handling setup. We probably want to actually display that error message to the user as well if it does occur. So what I will do here, outside of our search, we'll just create a new div that has a class name of search and then underscore errors. And then inside of there, we'll just simply print out the state if there's anything inside there. And we should probably also put out the channel name as well. So if we have got a channel name, if that's truthy, Then what we can do is just output a small template, and we'll just say videos from that particular channel name. So let's just save that and then go back to the page. So we've got our basic page. If we try and put in a channel ID and click get videos, then you can see obviously we've got the freecodecamp videos again. But if we put in a bad channel ID, let's just remove some characters and then click get videos again, you can see the actual call to the API fails, and you can see we've got that error state popping up underneath the actual form too. Okay, so I think we're probably about ready to style our application before we actually move on to breaking it down into components. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be using Sass, so we can say SCSS is the file extension. And in our index.js file, what we actually need to do is import that. So we can just say import app.scss. And that will ensure when Webpack bundles our content and include all of our styles as well. So let's go ahead and style this now. So let's look at our app.scss file. So the first thing we're going to do is actually import a bit of a different font. And in the example app that we had before, on Google Fonts, there was a font called Commissioner, I believe it was. So let's see if we can find that. And yeah, there it is. So let's just grab that. Probably just need a standard regular and maybe bold as well. So let's just grab this, and I'm just going to grab a reference to that and put it into our index page first of all, so that we've got the font actually loading. So I'm going to use that font all through the application. So let's first of all pop it in here. And I'm also going to pop it onto the font property as well, just so it affects things like the input and buttons that we've got as well. Then I'm just going to set up some styling. So we'll create a class called app container. So I'm just going to wrap the whole thing in a bit of padding. So let's actually make sure that class is there. And let's add it into our outer div here. So class name is app container. And if we just check that that's working, if we go back to our actual application, yeah, you can see the fonts actually being loaded, and we've got some padding all around that too. So that seems to be working okay. Let's go back to our SCSS. Let's tackle the search first of all. So the search class that we've got, there's going to be an input box inside of there. So we're going to give that a bit of padding and get rid of the border radius as well. There it is. And let's set a border around the input box as well. So a border of 1 pixel and solid. And we want something a bit reddish, a bit like YouTube. So let's just pick a color for that. And we'll give it a bit of width as well. So we'll say it's got 200 pixels worth of width. And we'll also just target its focus state as well. And we'll just say when it's focused, we'll give it a bit of outline. And just again, set that to a nice red color. But this time maybe we'll just go a bit darker. Okay, and the next thing we're going to have is the button. So again, we'll give that a bit of padding so that it matches the input box. And the margin left, just to move it across a little bit, so it's 10 pixels across. And we'll give it a background color. So I think that should probably use the same color as the border. So we'll say 2991111. The actual text itself we want to be white. And we'll say there's no border on that. Make sure the cursor is pointer. And we're going to set some additional styling for hover and also disabled. And we'll just set that background color maybe to this value up here. And then the last thing at the top part of the app is we want to set the errors. So we'll say underscore errors, give it some margin top, just so it pushes it down from the form a little bit. And then we'll also set the color, and we'll set it to this red color here. Because it's an error, so we'll put it in red so that we know that it's bad. And that should be all the styling that we need for the top of our app page. So if we go back and have a look at that, we can see there's now just a bit of styling on those two form elements. So let's focus on styling the videos now. So first of all, we'll set the elements to display as flex, and we're going to remove any wrapping as well so that they just go onto separate rows. And each of those videos is going to have an item inside it. So we're just going to explicitly set the width, 200 pixels. And again, we'll have it a bit of margin all the way around it. And we're just going to animate the transform property, and just for a little bit of interest. And I'm going to put a bit of box shadow in just to lift each video off the page. So when we hover over any of those videos, what we want to do is just tilt it to one side, as you saw at the start of the video. So we'll use a transform and we'll make it slightly bigger. So just scale it by an ever so slight amount and then rotate by 3 degrees should be fine. And just to add a little bit more interest as well, we could say, and for every nth child, for every odd video that appears in the list, its hover state is going to be the same. So we'll say it's transformed by its scale a little bit, but we'll just rotate it the other way. Okay, so that's each of the items. So that'll be the video container for each of the videos that we've got. So now for each of those videos, we're going to style the image. And the first thing we've got inside of there is the actual anchor tag itself. So let's display that as block and just make sure it takes up the whole width and height of the containing element. And then we want to, there's an image tag inside there, so we'll make sure the width of that is 100% too, and also its height. And then the only thing that we really want to focus on at the bottom of this is the footer. So let's target that. And I'm going to set its display as flex. And I'm going to align the items inside there as center. So this will just make sure that the title is actually centered in the footer at the bottom. Set a specific font size, put a bit of padding around it, and then just make sure it's got a height of 50 pixels. So the only thing that's inside the footer is the P tag. So let's remove any margin from that and just set its font weight to 800. So I've just skipped over that quite quickly just because I don't think it's the most important part of our application today. The source code will obviously give you all this detail if you need it. But if we go back to our application now, if we go and grab the channel ID for freecodecamp again and paste that in there, this time when we click get videos, it's not actually appearing as we'd like it. So maybe we didn't add one of our classes in our component. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. Oh yeah, so instead we've got videos items here, and so it should just be videos item. So let's save that and go back. Let's try that again. Oh, it seems to be somewhat there, but we don't have the actual flex display there, so we must have missed something off there. So what we probably haven't done is actually put this inside of a videos container. So let's just create another div here, the class name. And the class that we set up was just called videos, I think. Yeah, so videos. So that'll have the flex properties for us. So let's set that here. And we just need to move that all the way down to the bottom of the loop, which is here. So if we save that and try one last time. Yeah, that seems a bit better. We've got the flex property as well. So that should give us rows of the videos that we've been retrieved. So we probably could just leave the application here as it is because we've got a pretty much working project at the moment. So we can retrieve videos, we can catch any errors that kind of occur, and we're displaying all of our videos in a nice format. But really what we need to do with React is to put everything into components so we can make them reusable. And there isn't a massive amount of scope for it in this particular application, but we could make components out of things like the individual videos and possibly also the search boxes. So just to wrap up the video, we're going to put those into components and move the relevant code into those places so that you can see how you can create individual components in your own projects. So let's head back over. So the first thing we'll do is create the video component. So let's just say we'll create a new file called video.js. And in the same way that we did when creating our app component, we'll just export a constant variable and we'll just call it video. And this is an arrow function. And because we're just going to be returning the template that we have in our app.js, we can just open up some brackets there and use an implicit return. And if we go over into the app.js file, so this is the template for each of the videos. So we can just grab that from here and remove it and then just paste that into the video template and tidy that up. But the problem that we've got now is we haven't got access to the actual individual video to actually get the link and the GUID, etc. So what we need to do is use React props to actually access this. So in our video function, we can actually access the props parameter that will be automatically passed in. And we can remove this key here. We're actually going to move that into the app component. But now when we want to get the video.link, for example, we can just say props.video.link and props.video.GUID and props.video.title. We just need to make sure that we import React in here as well, otherwise this will fail. Import React from React. Then in our app.js file, so instead of putting the template directly now in this mapping loop here, we can actually import the video component. So we say import video from, and it'll be from the video file. And then for each video item that we've got here in the videos array, we can just pass in a video component. We can set the video prop that was in the template a moment ago, just to the video item that we're looking at from the array, and just make sure we close off the template there. And we can put back our key here so that we don't get that error again. And we'll use video.GUID. So now every time we loop around, we're going to actually create a new video component, pass in the prop of video so that we can access the link and the title, etc. And if we want to make any more changes, we can do that in the new video component file that we've created. So let's save the app file again. If we go back to the app, and we'll need to grab a channel ID again. And if we paste that in here, you can see it still works as before. Except this time now, each of these is its own individual component that we're passing data into, and the template is rendering that based on the value that we pass into props. So let's do the same thing, but for the search component here. So let's create a new file. And let's first of all import React. So in React from React. And we'll export new constant search, which again, we'll need some props. So we'll export that. But the search component relies on a bit of state from the app.js file. But it's only really relevant inside of the search component itself. So what I'm going to do is this bit here where we're actually setting the channel ID, which is what the user's typing in. I'm going to remove that from here and then just pop it into the search component. And then we need to render a template as well. So let's just return some JSX. And I'm going to grab the same thing that we had in here. So I won't grab the search errors. I'm just going to grab everything up to the search div and just take that out here and then pop it into the template that's rendered from search. So our state is now being updated inside of this search component, and that's fine for the channel ID. So we're doing the same thing again. Every time someone types something into the search box, this function will run, and we'll set this channel ID state up here to equal to whatever they've typed in. But we've got a problem here because we don't have access to the set current channel ID state. That's actually something that's still living in the app.js file. So how do we handle that? Well, first of all, let's actually render the search component in our page. So just above here where we had it before, search, and I might need to import that as well. I'm actually going to pass in a prop into the search component, and the prop I'm going to pass in is called set current channel ID, which is basically going to be passed in via a function. And the function is going to have an argument of ID. And when that function runs, what I'm going to do is call the set current channel ID state setter that we've got in app.js up here with the value of ID that comes back. So we're setting a function on this prop. So when we go to search.js, props will have this function available. So what we can do, instead of saying set current channel ID, all we need to do is say props.setCurrentChannelID, because that's the name of the function prop that we set back in. And it will call that function with the current channel ID that's set as the state in the search component. So by doing this, we're passing back the value of channel ID up through set channel ID props into the app.js. So it ends up here in this ID variable. In fact, we can remove this as it's a single parameter for the arrow function. And then that gets passed into the setter for current channel ID, which in turn re-triggers this code inside of our useEffect function. So if we click save and go back to our page, we've got lots of errors, so let's have a look at those. Okay, so use state is not defined, so we just need to make sure we import that when we're using it in our various components. So we'll import React and we'll import use state 2. So if we save that and then go back to the page and refresh, we've got another error, and that's saying render is not defined, and I've done something stupid here. Instead of calling return, I've called render, which is for class-based components. But because we just got a simple function for our React component, we just need to return the JSX template. So yeah, now we have our app back up and running. Let's make sure we've got the channel ID that we want to look up. Let's paste it in there, click get, and everything's working as it was before. So as I said, we could go further with this and componentize more parts of our projects, such as the header and the title where we've got videos from the author. But I'm going to leave it there now, and it's up to you if you want to break those things down into further components. And you've seen how you can pass in data and get data back out using the props mechanism. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful and you've got some good ideas about how you can use this for your own React projects. It's definitely worth following this through, so grab a copy of the code from GitHub and have a go at it yourself. You can always refer back to the video if you get stuck, and hopefully by the end of that you'll be familiar with using some of the basic React features to build your own YouTube video player. So that's it for now. I'll see you next time.